very moving. I guess that was, yeah, I guess it was like 5 months ago. I don't know. Time is so strange with this pandemic. I can't tell. Some things I think like, oh, that was like years ago, and then others I was like was weeks ago. I don't know.
I mean, and I think everything's speeding up as well, so it's just wild for sure.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, it's May, which is
I
like,
know, right? So yeah, time is really fast and like really slow. It's like Groundhog Day, but it's going fast. It's very bizarre. Very bizarre. So yeah, it's yeah. So anyways, it was a few months ago. It was a few months ago that I got to learn about seeds. So and I spoke to Ronnie. I guess are you guys partners, or did you start it? Like how did it how did you guys come together, find each other?
sure. So I've been on this journey maybe see, now I got to do math and figure out what year it is. Anyway, 4 or 5 years, sometime like that. The whole thing started with food. My passion is food. I'm
Yeah.
deeply into permaculture, growing my own food, having a relationship with plants. Like, I loved your quote, if we could treat food as sacred, it would change everything. I'm so about that, because then we start getting healthier and we can start thinking clear, and everything stems off of that. Ecological
Yeah.
health. So it was all about food. One of my friends was doing a crowd food network, that's what it was called, peer-to-peer food. Grow food, not lawns, cook food out of your house, sell it to your neighbors, the platform mediates it, right? They weren't first to try this, and they won't be the last. Most of them fail. Why? Because if there's a marketplace platform charging fees to intermediate neighbors, it fails. Airbnb do it because you rent a hotel once, or you rent a house once, right? Uber does it because it's more convenient than when the driver gives you their freaking card to call them again. You don't do that.
Yeah.
They love, Miss Brown's Pizza down the street. You're just going to get her phone number and give her $5. You're not going to keep using it.
Right.
They have a hard time scaling. So about 5 years ago or so, he reached out to me. He's like, hey, do we do a cryptocurrency with this? At first I was like, no, but then, my part of my life, I was just all about grounding. I was working on intentional communities and designing economic models for intentional villages and how they could be designed and make decisions together. So I was really deep into crypto and DAOs that were first coming up at that time and all that stuff. So he mentioned that. At first I was like, no, you just don't throw crypto at everything. But it was after he planted that seed of an idea a few months later, during a breathwork ceremony. It just kind of came through. The breathing was like an expansion and contraction monetary system. It was a little bit weird. But it all just kind of came through. It's like, oh wait, no, we do build a financial system. We base it off of local food. And then we can make these platforms better than free. It's like, what if the Federal Reserve was subsidizing local food? They could do it. They've made trillions. Why don't they just give money to the local food systems? We could be doing that. So that's what we do. And then we build a need, or rather a use for this new monetary system. When the plumber comes over, they're like, hey, will you accept this new currency? He's like, well, what can I do with it? It's like, well, you could buy cheaper, faster, healthier food for dinner tonight. It's like, oh yeah, well, of course I'll accept this then. So it made a lot of sense to build a new financial system based off a food system. So that's really where, the heart of seeds kind of came from. That's more of a tangible heart. I think the heart's a little bit more etheric than that. I feel like this is a transition humanity's going through. Not everyone, lots and lots of people are getting this vision that this needs to happen, and all the pieces have just been plugging together. So it's really been my personal journey with this for the last 5 years. Is other people who have seen the same thing be like, oh yes, I see this vision, and this is my piece for it. It's like, great, your piece fits in here, and we just keep plugging in, and it's been building into this thing.
Amazing. That's amazing.
So Ronnie came into the picture, yes, a year and a half ago. I met him at Wonderfruit. It was a festival in Thailand. I don't know if he shared this, but he was getting the same idea. Hey, we need to build a new financial and economic system. We could put it on an app. He was telling people about that. It's like, oh yes, well, this is what we've been kind of working on for the last few years. Like, why don't we do this together? But yeah, so Ronnie is a part of this, but HIFA, which is the organization that's been working on seeds for last year, has 150 different active members. The seeds community now has several different organizations all focused on building seeds, so it's no longer just HIFA. And I think it's got a couple thousand people in it, but maybe 200-300 people who are actively engaged in architecting it or engineering it or really building the foundation. So
right.
Anyway, short form. I'll stop there.
So it was, I mean, it was, you were obviously inspired by, I guess, by food. I mean, that was the core of it, right? I mean, the relation, well, so yeah. So and I've thought about I mean, I've always felt this, that both our connection to the planet and our horrific disconnection from the planet is epitomized by food, right? I mean, it should be, it is our first point of consumption, and the way we treat it, and the way we treat the planet in such a violent and extractive way to get it, is what I think really disconnects us from not only the planet, but therefore also our own essence, right? And if we treated food as sacred, we treat the planet as sacred, and our relationship with our own consumption would be, more humble, more pure, and more patient, I think, rather than so greedy, and boundless, right? It's like, there's a reason why we have this, especially in the United States, this epidemic of obesity. I mean, we don't have any relationship with our food anymore, except one of just pure greed and consumption, and it's consuming us. We're consuming the planet and destroying it at the same time because of that. That's where it starts, right? And if we really did think about the miracle, right? The miracle that every bite that we eat is. I mean, they're just the miracle of what it is. And everything that happens, the entire process that brings that into being and that then nourishes us. I mean, that whole cycle is enough to build an entire spiritual movement on, if people could just see it that way. And it would change everything. It literally would change if we can be careful with our food, and we could be, humbled by it. I think humbled by the whole process of it. We would see everything differently. We would see everything differently, the way we see the planet. So I think it's really inspired that that's the starting point for this, because I do think that it's not just an economic model that we need to change, right? We need to change our spiritual model, and it starts with, I think, very much the physicality and our connection to life. So yeah, I think so. I really, yeah. I mean, I love the seeds idea, because I do think it is, at its a sort of, in a way, its most shallow level, what it does is it changes the economic model, and that's, I think, really, really important. But if if you go deeper to where the inspiration for it is, I think there's something even deeper and more meaningful potentially in its expression, and I find that really inspiring.
Yeah, there's a few things you said that deeply resonated. So one reflection is, it's kind of like certain martial arts, like Aikido. It's a weird way to describe this, but you don't fight your opponents, you redirect the energy, right? So it's kind of like our economic system. Like we can kind of look at the prevailing one as an opponent, although it's a weird framing, but it's got such tremendous force driving into a certain direction. And I think so far all the movements have been against trying to fight that force, like resist it. And that's got us probably absolutely nowhere. So I think the drive could be like, how do we redirect that? Which is where I think the economic and incentive models come in. Like, I see them as a bridge. I don't think the regenerative civilization needs to have, coercive economic models and incentive structures to elicit good behavior. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Like, it's not my role to kind of figure that out. But I do believe it's the bridge that helps us get there, because then we could step into tools that allow us to exponentially evolve them. Like once we can then actually, like we can't upgrade money right now. If we felt like we wanted to step into a resource-based economy, it's just not possible. Everyone I talk to is like, yeah, fantastic idea, let's do that. How do we do that? Well, we can't, so let's just keep talking about it. But if it was as simple like, well, let's put up a proposal, this is the code that's going to change, and this is how the outcome is going to be, and then we vote on it, and if it passes, the code automatically updates, and then we change the system. It's like, oh, well, yeah, now we can start evolving it. So seeds, like how it looks today, that's not how it's meant to look, 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Like it's meant to evolve as we step into it, so we can get more beautiful and complex. It just starts with like how we see the world today, so people can actually join it, and then it makes sense.
Well, I think that's also that's what I mean. That's in some ways the exciting thing about it is you don't exactly know how it's going to grow.
Oh, I mean,
right? You don't know what direction it's going to go in, and you don't know what's going to be possible. I mean, I really do think that we're very blinded. We're so blind. We're so blinded by what we think we know, right? We've been living in these institutions for a really long time, and so we can't see past them. And and humans are not as creative and amazing as humans are. We're really not that creative. and most of what you find out there is this kind of, it's like, so how do we define something? We define it in opposition to something else, right? It's like we're really good at black and white, up and down, comparisons and whatever. We're not really good at seeing, a completely tangential, like different dimensional kind of solution, right? We're not really good at that. But I think those things become more visible the more steps we take in that direction, right? So that's what's really exciting, is that the entire model is one that by design evolves. Like that's pretty amazing. That I think that's like an institutional innovation that I think is really, really important for the future. And I think it's fascinating the way it'll play out.
Oh my gosh. I mean, so if we're looking at this in layers, the foundational layer is regenerative food. I think we need that if we're going to have a nice civilization. On top of that is a new economic model. Like, how do we distribute value amongst each other? And then on top of that, we have the collective intelligence. It's the governance system. I think that's one of the more interesting, and we're just getting into the heart of that. I mean, we've been playing experiments for the last year and a half, and from where it started to where it is today is night and day, completely different. I've been working on this, video trying to explain what's happening in seeds, called regenerative organizing and governance, for the last year and a half. And I just can't get a video out because it keeps changing so quickly. So I've yet to even publish it. I've rewritten it like 30 different times now. But that's probably the most exciting part, is that collective intelligence, because I fully agree with you. Individually, we're not that great, but collectively we are. And if we could figure out systems that harness that collective and figure out the best ways of moving forward, like that's the real game changer. And I think that's also where we've spent probably the most time now. Like solving regenerative food is easy. We already have all those solutions. We already know how to do it. We already have the technology. We already know what to do. Like, I think that one's kind of solved. What wasn't solved was how to actually drive the resources towards it. And then what's certainly like the tip of the iceberg of being solved is like, how do we actually make decisions together? Like, we're used to like voting for a president and then being, terrible for 4 years and then voting for a new one. But we're not actually used to like making decisions ourselves, or how that fractals, or like how we actually decide what groups are making what decisions, and who has more authority to make what decisions, and all of that.
Yeah, that's a super exciting stuff. I mean, and I think honestly, as because I actually work on this a lot. This is my jam these days, is actually trying to convince governments that we need to actually harness collective intelligence, and we just need to use it. We need to we have to like reinvent democracy. Democracy is it's not supposed to be one person, one vote. That's not what democracy is, but so many people think of it as that. And it's a very, it's a very transactional kind of experience. And it's very like sort of consumer based, right? Like you go buy something, if you don't like what you bought, then you get to return it 4 years later or 2 years later, or however long you have. that model just doesn't work anymore. It just doesn't. That's not the way the world operates. And there's so many opportunities for us I think in so many ways, but there's so many opportunities for us to come together in new ways because technology has allowed us to do that. And to not do it is just such an incredible failure of imagination and will, and such a missed opportunity to do it. So yeah, I spend a lot of my time these days trying to convince governments to engage in all these different kinds of participatory processes, from crowdfunding policy solutions to sitting citizens down at round tables and using like citizens juries to help with problem solving, all the way to convincing them to like institute different systems so that, you know, citizens can make decisions, and holding up as examples models of governments where they do this really well, because there are places where they're doing more of it. But that all of that stuff is awesome, but it also feels like it's just the beginning, because I think in the deeper level of this is not just harnessing collective intelligence, but actually breaking open human creativity, in collective creativity, in a way that really helps it come forth. And what I mean by that is almost like it's like social experimentation in small groups. You get groups together, you get them to you bring them to a place emotionally and psychologically where you really have a trust-based circle, and complete strangers can create amazing things together when you get them into that space. And there are ways to do it that actually bring people into that space fairly quickly. But and there's an amazing amount of, I think, you know, ingenuity and experimentation happening in this area right now. And I think that the future, honestly, I've felt this for a long time, the future of community and the community architecture that we need, the civic architecture that we need everywhere, that's going to replace like the Rotary clubs and the churches and all that stuff that we used to have in the past, is going to be people coming together to have unique experiences together that are profound and meaningful because they're creating together. And I think it's going to take us probably a generation to get there, but I think there are so many amazing examples, and that's how they will govern themselves. They will govern themselves through these processes of coming together and creating trust and developing insight and solutions together through these processes. And I do think that's like, again, I think it's going to take us a generation or two to get to that kind of a democracy, but I think that's what the future is. So I think that, you know, the model that the fact that you're spending so much time like thinking about this is so important, the human stuff you can't underestimate. I mean, you can't. With people, slow is fast. And so you should take your time figuring it out.
Well, I don't know if we have a choice.
Right.
It's certainly the most, you know, rewarding and generative aspect, but also the most challenging. Because figuring out an economic model, I think, is way easier than figuring out ways for the humans to genuinely interact with it. But, you know, that's where the architecture comes in, because we aren't trying to figure out a one-size-fits-all solution. I think that's also what like the old paradigm's always about, like figure out the product and it looks like this. But we're saying, well, here's a tool set that allows groups to do their own. And then we're actually working with evolution. We say, these tools are here to support you. But then every group then decides how they make decisions. We give them a card set. Like we look at it like a game, actually. You know, it's like a card builder game. I don't know if you play it. But you come to a group and you're like, okay, how do I make decisions? And we give them like 7 different cards. Like, here's 7 different ways you can make decisions. Like, choose which one works for your group. And they're like, well, we don't like those 7. We can build a new one. Or they're like, yeah, we're going to try that one. It's like, well, here's 4 different economic models. It's like, okay, cool, we'll pick this one. You know, and every group is then being able to design their own system based off their own culture and priorities and what they're trying to accomplish and all that stuff. So I think that's the beautiful part of this. Is we're not trying to sit here and, well, I'm saying the system's not trying to say this is how to interact. It's saying here's tools that support that interaction.
Yeah.
Help really ground.
But is it, I mean, it still has to be kind of principles based, right? I mean, there are probably ways that you wouldn't want people to organize themselves, potentially.
Potentially. I'm personally in this space where I try to get rid of all those value judgments, because even like autocracy, for example, those are great under certain circumstances. And if everyone's wanting to be in an autocracy and it's explicit. That's what's really the most important thing to me. Is it needs to be agreed upon and explicit. And then if it is, every organization structure is okay, and they all have their own times. But it needs to be
that's true
and clear. If everyone comes together like, we love this person, we want them to tell us everything what to do, and we're happy with it, awesome. And people do this all the time with like, stages and whatnot. They want that person to tell them what to do, and that's what they're there for. So.
Oh gosh, yeah. Humans really do want a leader. We're always looking for a god. Why are we always looking for a god? It's amazing. We truly always are. But no, but that's true. I mean, there were plenty of times over the last few years where I'm like, we just need a king, like a really good one, like just a good benevolent king. That's what we need. Anyway, but I guess that's fair. I mean, but I could still imagine, like, I'm just thinking about, the governance systems that I know, and this is the number of, so there's lots of organizations that are now trying to develop something called an alliance of democracies. What the utility of this is, I don't know, but they've come to our organization again and again because we work on governance and we specialize, I would say, in processes and systems, right? That's really what we focus on. It's not so much the sexy policy stuff. It's not like education, or we do some stuff on economics, but again, it's all pretty structural. It's like, how do we organize ourselves? And I would say that our well, this is the work of, I guess, everybody to a certain extent, is just changing hearts and minds, right? That's I would say that drives 70 to 80% of the economy, just changing hearts and minds, trying to convince people to do something, whether it's buy something or whatever. But in any case, so we've been approached several times about this alliance of democracies thing. And one of the things they start with is, okay, well, what happens when, because this is an alliance democracy and it's supposed to stand up for things like human rights and, democratic values and people having agency and so on and so forth. What happens when, a government stops behaving that way? So we look at Hungary or Poland right now. And it's hard to say if those people really want to live in the system that they live in. I think more or less those governments were democratically elected. Even though they are, they're shutting down dissent and imprisoning journalists and doing all these things that aren't very, in line with democratic values. And so that's one of the questions that this, that we would have to answer, because at some point those governments stop being democracies and then they shouldn't be part of the alliance of democracy. But how do you make that decision? And what are the conditions under which you would, and whatever. And so I think consent is really important. I agree with that. But it's not always easy to tell whether consent is really granted or not, right? And how would you measure that? So that's not something you're probably coming up against at this point, but I wonder if it could.
And I've got one perspective on it. I think you're actually dealing with the most juicy stuff, because that's where real systems change happens, is providing models. So anyway. But yeah, I think the real thing is having that freedom to move. If a president gets elected in the States and I don't like it, what's my choices? To move to a different country, right, to wait 4 years? Like, that's not
move to Bali.
Okay, I did that. So that's the freedom of movement. So I think that's where the real idea is. It's the freedom to fractal and the freedom of movement. Because if we have systems that are inherently voluntary, that are as easy as maybe changing an app or downloading a different tool set, making a few clicks on your phone and you can literally change the economic system which you're operating in. If it becomes that easy to flow, then we get rid of all of the ways of having to analyze, are people happy? We don't have to ask them that, because if they're not happy, they'll leave. It'll be very evident.
It's true.
I think we actually talk to most Americans at any given point, none of them are happy. They voted for Trump because of the system. They didn't vote for Trump because they loved Trump. They voted for him because they wanted to see it burn down. And honestly, I kind of share that perspective. It's like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. I can understand why. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like democracies are just an illusion. They don't work, especially when you start getting parties, because then you really don't. The party takes over. It's not
and I don't know. It's hard to speak.
Wow.
It's hard to speak to the advent of, the advent of democracy was a good evolution. It was a fantastic evolution. There's no doubt. And it was a necessary one at the time. It was historically, revolutionary when it came along. How parties came about and what their utility was, maybe there was, a moment in time where it did make sense for that to exist. Now, yeah, representative democracies just run its course. It doesn't work anymore, and it's not trusted. And it's really in. Here's the way I see it. I think that really fundamentally the system has changed so radically, and the dimensions of our system have changed so radically in so many ways, and the dynamics of it have. And yet we're living in an institutional infrastructure that doesn't recognize that. It's still pretending that we live in societies, and like we live in these sort of pyramid structures and hierarchies and those hierarchies were stable for a long time because there were lots of people at the bottom and a few people at the top, and information was power, and those people at the bottom didn't have access to the people at the top, and there wasn't a lot of mobility between the layers, and so on and so forth. That's the entire system, and that's how it worked, and that's how our institutions were built, and that's what representative democracy is, right? You vote for one guy, that person sits in the seat and makes all the decisions, and not a lot of people have access to that person, and so on and so forth. But we don't live in a society anymore. We live in a network, and we live in a network more and more. And the rules of networks are completely different. The dynamics are completely different. Information is abundant, and it's everywhere, and everybody has access to it. It's not the people with the fewest access points who have the power. It's the ones with the most access points that have the power. Ideas spread incredibly quickly. Information isn't actually what passes across a network, it's more intensity. That's what a network communicates better than anything else, is like, what is everybody thinking about and how important it is to everybody at that moment. That's what's really communicated, not whatever the quality of information or whatever truth. So I think, this goes back to the idea that we're not living in the same system that we were. And more people are living and operating most of their lives in networks, not in hierarchical societies. But our institutions still behave like that's how the world works. And that's why they're not working. That's why they're faltering. They're pretending that the old rules exist, and most of the world is kind of moving on, just like Seeds is saying, like, okay, I just want to throw all of that away because none of it makes sense to me, and it doesn't make sense because it's not supposed to anymore. So it's really time to move past. And networks aren't perfect. They're going to have their own problems, right? Hierarchies were not perfect. There were definitely a lot of problems with those, and we came to know them more and more. But and networks will, networks can do amazing things. Like an idea can take hold and it can grow like wildfire, and the entire culture can change kind of overnight, which is amazing and beautiful and incredible. It can also manifest as a mob mentality, and people can get really hurt really easily, and there's no context. There's no, the mob becomes judge, jury, and executioner, and there's no recourse for whatever the mob decides at a given point. So there are things that even within and the amount of disinformation and so on, and the ability to manipulate people. So that there are things we are going to have to manage about networks. It's not about networks good, societies bad. It's about whatever system we're operating in, we're always going to want to try to optimize the best things about that system and manage the downsides of those systems. But right now, the work in front of us is to start seeing the system for what it is and stop pretending it's something it's not. We really need to let go of the institutions that we're hanging on to so tightly, because they're falling apart, and it's and a lot of people are going to get hurt the longer we hang on to a model that doesn't work anymore.
Ooh, so 112% to all of that. I love the reframing from hierarchies to networks. So a couple quick responses is this is what came up. I don't think the industries are going to change any more than the monarchy like willingly moved into a democratic republic. Like it's didn't like we needed to create the democratic republic and have it alongside the monarchy and show people hand in hand there's a difference. Because that's the problem today. You know, you point out all the problems of our capitalistic, democratic, with huge quotes, economic systems. And people are like, yeah, they're terrible, but it's the best thing we've got. It's way better than communism, right? And that's always what happens. Like, you know, this vision of communism that's evil and it was terrible, and that's the scapegoat. You know, but what we need to do is just provide clear alternatives and say, no, like we're not talking about that. We're not talking about systems that were designed hundreds of years ago. We're talking about new ones that are right now that give us fundamentally new capabilities. And then it becomes this natural progression. It's like, oh yeah, for sure, let's step into this new system. So then we can get the ideological debate of, you know, capitalism versus communism. You know, we can get into, hey, this is progression. This just gives us more freedom. And that's something that works across all boundary lines. Like that's what's so nice about this new system. It's actually uniting all of the desires of the red and the blue sides. You know, they want to take care more of the environment and have more freedom of voice. Like they want to like have decisions on the world that they're operating within, and they want to see things more clearly. It's like everyone wants things. No one doesn't want those things. So it's very easy to say we just get more of everything you want, and this is the direction you can go in, you know. So I think that's what's really nice about it. And it's also, you know, incumbent industries, they never change willingly. They change when a startup or something else forces them to change. So I think kind of, you know, my personal approach is talking to existing countries. So much going on and so much to like worry about in the short term. They have no energy or time or probably even capacity to change their systems to the degree that needs to change. They need to be forced to, or they become obsolete. And that's when they'll make a decision. If you're saying, hey, if you don't change it, the world will collapse. Like, well, it'll collapse in 50 years and I'll be dead, so whatever. And there's nothing I can
whatever,
do. You know?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very human nature. We, you know, we put off, and institutions in particular, like, you know, I liked what you were saying at first, like, you know, you can't put out the film because you keep reinventing the model, right? One of the things I've struggled with, in since starting this work, really, well, when we first started the work that we're doing now, it was very much about like tweaking governance systems. And it was probably around 2015 that we kind of woke up and be like, wow, that is not going to work. We need a much bolder approach. We need to realize that the entire world is changing. It's changing right in front of us. And like, we need to reinvent the entire system, right? And so that became the project from that moment on. But one of the things I've struggled with is, how do you create an institution at all, or one that operates according to the dynamics of this age that we're living in, which is constant change, right? Constant evolution, constant adaptation. I mean, the cycle time of history has collapsed. I mean, it goes so much faster now that I don't think we have the time to institutionalize it all, in a way, right? It is this sort of amorphous, constant evolution and adaptation, and that process and capability is what we have to institutionalize. And I don't know how you do that, because that's not how institutions work historically, right? Like, that's not how you define them. They're like policies, you know, and processes and rules and regulations and things that are static and that hold things in place and make them stable. And that's not actually what we need to do. We actually need something that allows for a very fundamental kind of evolution and adaptation, because I think the opportunities are not going to stop coming. And as soon as we do something that sort of prevents us from seizing those opportunities, the obsolescence is going to come at us that much faster, just because things are changing so fast. And that's just the pace of the world we're living in now. So, but I haven't figured that out. What does a 21st century institution look like? What does institutionalization look like at all? I don't know. I really don't.
I'll take one stab at that. And I would say from institutions to open source operating systems.
So what are the rules of an open source operating system, apart from that it's open source and then, you know, everybody contributes to it and invents on it? So it's like everything's a platform, basically, right?
Yeah, everything's
The
a
idea.
platform. And all the models are coming to the open market. I think that we're in a period where everything's changing so rapidly because humanity needs to shift. So it's kind of like going through that birth phase. It's kind of like actually, I've never given birth, but it's probably like actually giving birth. Like everything, like time condenses, like things get really intense for that short period. And I feel like that's where humanity's at. I don't think this is a constant state. Like humanity would collapse if it changed this much. I think we're just going through that change. Because we need stability. You know, Bitcoin was so successful because it didn't change. That's what everyone loved about it. It stayed the same.
Right.
You know? But that's an open source operating system. And people got behind it and they can change it, but people don't want to. Even though the world can be, it can change. And then it gives rise to a whole ecosystem of copycats and projects. And then the market gets to choose like which, you know, operating system do we want to be a part of. So that's what's kind of interesting about this stage is all the institutional models, governance models, economic models, all of that is coming to the open market, where people are going to be able to start picking and choosing what type of system they want to be a part of, you know, what type of economic do I want to engage with. Like people never have that choice. It's something we feel like is fish in water, you know, like we're born into an economic system. This is the way it is, and this is how it works. Like you don't get to say like, okay, I'm 18. What economic system do I want to be a part of? You know, it's not like it's not a birthright, but I feel like it will be. At some stage,
but that's, I mean,
at a certain age, will be like, good. Now you get to choose what type of governance and
now you get to choose.
engage in, you know?
No, but I think that's, I mean, that is amazing, and that is kind of how we're. I mean, hey, the thing that I think is going to radically, it's already making the system shudder in a way, but I think the thing that's really going to shake the foundations of all of our systems is identity. I think our ability to choose our identity and the freedom to do that is starting to manifest in so many different and really interesting ways. And people are actually seizing those opportunities. So I'm not just talking about like gender, which is obviously a huge and fundamental one, and earth shattering when you think about so many of the systems and how so many societies have organized themselves, right? So I love how fundamentally you know, aggravating to our social systems that is. But I think it's a symptom or a sort of early manifestation of something that much more fundamental that's coming, and it's going to be all around that that our ultimate freedom is to choose our identity, and our identity has actually nothing to do with our geography. And you know, humanity seizing on this idea that we all belong to the earth. The earth does not belong to us. We belong to the earth somehow. And that the, you know, that the earth systems, the natural systems, the climate system are we have to reckon with the fact that these borders we've created are a complete fabrication of our own imagination. They only exist in our minds. That's the only place they exist. They don't exist in our biological systems, in our climate systems, and are not like zoological. There's no other dimension whereby they matter except in the story that we tell ourselves. And so I think when we're already at a point when our identity is not defined by the physical body that we are born into, we've already gotten there. We're already struggling with that kind of an idea. Geography is going to be really easy to let go of. It's going to be really easy once we've reckoned with, you know, the basic physicality of our own bodies. And I think that we're going to run up against, once we have that freedom of identity, that's going to explode the nation state system in the minds of people. Because as I said before, most of our work is about changing hearts and minds, changing people's minds. When we really reckon with that in a real way, the realization, the tsunami that will be to all our systems, because all our political systems, everything is organized geographically, it's organized by nation state, it's where we put the power in the system. That's going to shatter the foundations of everything we've created. So, and it's going to be an idea. It's going to be an idea that's articulated in some way. It's going to be like, you know, Me Too or Black Lives Matter or something, and it's going to take over the globe, and it's going to happen really magically fast and amazing and terrifyingly. But I do think that that's how it's going to happen. And it's going to change everything. Identity, the freedom to choose our identity.
Oh my God. I love that insight and framing. Um, I just had to take a couple notes because they just triggered a map that I want to make here. Um, it reminded me a little bit of Noam Chomsky. He talks about like what's acceptable bounds of debate and how typically what happens in the public domain, what you hear about is a microcosm of the real issue. So, gender, that's what was acceptable to actually discuss about because it wasn't harmful to the system. But really, like you were talking about, it's the tip of the iceberg to this whole identity picture, which is the ability to choose. Yeah, so I kind of want to dive into some things that we're creating with and how we can start weaving together. Because what replaces the nation state? I believe a couple things, and this is going to be entirely false because whatever we're seeing now isn't how it's going to line up anyway. But what replaces it, I think, is place-based villages. That's how you take care of what happens as far as law and everything else is concerned. Is going to be through cities and villages, very, very local.
Yeah.
On that scale.
Yeah.
But then the economic and governance systems are going to be choice-based. So you might have two villages right next to each other that have all agreed to be part of completely different global economic and governance systems. So that's what they plug into. But they're
And so do you think that's fascinating? I love that. That's amazing. That's a really interesting idea. So geography does become irrelevant. It's not about where you are. And are those governance systems, I guess, based on values? I mean, different values.
Cultures, values, different agendas, all of it. And if you don't like one, it's as easy as literally moving to the next village rather than trying to move to another country or state.
Right.
So we make it very, very hyper-local, very easy to translate. And the ones that don't have the values that people care about, they're going to disappear much quicker. So the weird cancerous elements we get, because what we're really doing here is we're aligning with evolution. How does evolution work? Things that are cancerous and destructive to their ecosystems, they die off and they die off quickly. Everything about our culture has been to fight that. We fight natural evolution, we fight all the things that are cancerous, so we try to keep them alive and hold on to them because we have this fear of death. But I think this new system is going to actually amplify that. So the things that aren't working and aren't serving human needs and are flourishing are going to quickly fade away. And everything about our current nation state systems are going to kind of be our, relics of the past. As wild to look back on as when we look back at kings. It's like, oh wow, we had kings and we had the whole. Anyway, don't need to get into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then we can even go a little bit further that when you're inside a system, you join and you say, I agree to this constitution. And I'm only going to do business with people who also agree to this constitution. And then everyone gets to pick their own. And then they get to choose who they want to do business based off those principles. So that you don't have one constitution to rule them all anymore. You have a marketplace of constitutions and they can evolve and change and be dynamic as needs change, right?
And they have to. I mean, they would have to, I think, to adapt to a society that has so much choice, right? They would have to. I wonder what that would cause. I wonder if you would end up with, over time, systems aligning so that there are fewer and fewer of them representing very different value systems. Or would you end up with a sort of like just a massive fragmentation as people spin off from one system because they see something they want to do that's not exactly that, it's a little bit different. And not a whole rejection of whatever. I think the only thing that would cause a greater, concentration of constitution. So what I would imagine is actually initially a lot of fragmentation, and then groups would start to recognize each other in each other. Like it'd be like, wait, that's a lot like ours. It's very similar, and there are strengths in numbers, and there are probably advantages to being larger. I don't know, but anyways, I would imagine a lot of
I want to
fragmentation.
that one because that I don't know is very important, because I think whether they're going to concentrate or decentralize has to do with the feedback loops. If there are advantages to the more people there are, the more power you have, then yes, they're going to concentrate. But if there's more advantages to being smaller, then it's going to decentralize. So it really depends on the feedback loops you put into the economic model. For example, seeds, we set our cap at 144. What's her?
Why?
I'm just having a brain fart right now. But it's the size of people they can have a direct relationship with. I forget who did the research on that. It's about 150, but really the number was 144. We consider that a region. And then each region gets a share of the harvest. So the more regions are actually the better. You want to get to 144 and really maintain that, because if you have 144 people and you're still getting a harvest, then those 144 people will get a relatively larger share of that abundance than if they kept getting bigger. So there's a natural tension to kind of try to stay small. And that's what we delineate as a region. So we try to have all of these micro regions. So these are the feedback
So,
build into it, is like, what is our, value base?
okay, so 144 people are the number of people you can feasibly have sort of some level of meaningful relationship with. That
Yeah.
kind of makes sense to me, absolutely. But how will that optimize for the economic model? I mean, will that make sense? Will that optimize the economic model? And I don't mean economics like in the way we're doing, but even look, I think there's going to be a lot of ways to, if we organize ourselves from a governance system, that's relatively small. I mean, 144 people is a tiny village. That is a really small village. Maybe it's a village, within like a town or something. And then there's lots of little villages in the town or whatever. But
yeah, there's better rate from that point on for sure. But anyway.
Yeah. It would be really interesting, because generally, at least historically, and I don't know if this is something contingent on human behavior, but our economy more or less maps to our governance system, right? They work together in a way. And sometimes, I mean, they work at odds with each other and people take advantage of the system and so on and so forth. Yes, but there is some mapping of the economic system onto the governance system, or vice versa. And at that scale, at 144 people, that's really, really small. You would actually need to obviously aggregate it from an economic perspective at a much larger level, I think, just to sort of meet people's needs, across a set of values. So your economy is not managed by your governance system, basically, is what that would mean, which is interesting. I don't know. I mean, and maybe it doesn't need to be. I mean, if, let's say, we do have a sort of regenerative model in place, you would still need some sort of kind of, I don't know, global constitution to ensure kind of fairness. Otherwise, the regenerative model, if some of us choose that and then others don't, then, that eventually the consumptive model will sort of, take over. And how do you get rid of competition? How do you stop people from being competitive and greedy?
Well, so there's a lovely phrase. It's like, competitive individuals outcompete collaborative individuals, but collaborative groups outcompete competitive groups. So I think we can keep competition. We just outcompete competition with collaboration, which is what nature does. Nature is inherently collaborative. That's what ecosystems are. So I don't know if we need to fight competition rather than just beat it. So,
right. Yeah.
But the 144, just clarity there. That's, if we're looking at an economy as like a human body, 144 is the cell. It's the smallest unit that makes up one of the elements. And then the cells aggregate into an organ or into a muscle group. And then those muscle groups and organs all come together to create a body, right? So that's how I kind of see it fractaling up, is using those types of systems. So 144 is the smallest unit that's where hopefully most of the interactions happen. Ideally, we're trying to get our needs met at that smallest unit, but then federate and fractal up into an entire economic system, which I think bodies are kind of what replaces nation states. So yeah, you'll have ones that still represent, maybe hundreds of millions of people, but they're going to be very fluid and dynamic, constantly changing and in flux.
And what if we, I mean, I would love to even kind of get away from the idea, the siloed way we think of these things, whether it's governments or, economic, politics, economics, whatever, I can't, and I don't know how to articulate it, but I think there's something about a whole person approach, right? A whole body approach, a whole person approach. And if we built up, scaled our systems from the elemental idea of somehow create, I don't know, it's not creating or serving or whatever, but it's somehow ensuring the whole person. And that was our starting point. And everything we built on that as a society or as a group of people was about ensuring the sort of the sanctity and the wholeness of the individual, but as a collective effort. That is our project. Our project is to treat the whole person, right? And so it's about, it's about whatever spirituality, it's about, nourishment, it's about whatever health, it's about community, it's about, and those were your building blocks for your community. Was how do you create, whole and fulfilled and happy people? If that's what you did, would you organize your entire society completely differently than we do now, rather than thinking it about like sectors and industries and leaving almost the people right the fuck out of it, frankly, is what we do now. Right? I mean, the people are the afterthought, and often they're abused by the systems, because we think of the system first and we don't think of the people enough. And I think if we had a completely different approach, it's just like if we had a whole planet approach, as opposed to thinking in countries, or thinking, and if we really had a very planetary approach to the way we thought about how do we manage this human project, I think we'd think about this and we'd approach it really, really differently, right? And I think it becomes less about the ego of of each country, and we think start to understand the sort of the I don't know, the divinity of the planet. But yeah, I wonder if if we could start there, just like, because what made me think of this was your idea of the cell, the village being the cell, or the cell of the body, right? What if we started with such a small building block, and how do we make this whole, and how do we make this kind of perfect? And if we organized ourselves around that, what would our society look like? How different would our constitution be written, if that's kind of what the purpose was to create this wholeness?
Thank you for this dialogue. It's just an epiphany of everything. But okay, so a couple responses. So the 144 is what we're considering as a village. I want to actually invite you to this Village Builders group. It's the Regenerative Village Builders Alliance that are all coming together.
I love that.
Anyway, they're very explicit about what are our human needs. So that's what we're coming together. Rather than a company coming together to say, hey, we build a product to make money, we say, hey, we come together to meet our needs. Let's explicitly talk about our needs. It's not just needs for food, water, shelter. It's needs for love, connection, autonomy,
community. Yeah.
All of these needs. Let's make them explicit and literally design an organization designed to meet our needs. Maybe we meet our needs for food by creating a product and then buying food, or maybe we grow it. So then we think about just meeting our needs, we restructure how we go about doing it, and then we just become the most efficient way of meeting our needs. And it's probably more efficient to grow our own food than it is to buy it, right? So that's the 144. You ground up, you try to meet all of our needs locally, get really explicit about what those are. But then why it's so important that the economies aren't place-based is that's how we think global. Like the economies belong to Earth and they represent the Earth. And there might be 30 of them or whatever, however many, but they are Earth-based economies that people get to opt into. So now it's no longer thinking of what's good for just the United States. Now we're thinking, okay, what's good for the planet within our economy? Yeah. So now it's everyone's economy to deal with the Great Pacific Garbage Patch rather than nobody's, which is why no one's doing it,
Yeah.
We begin to shift our awareness. Now our identity becomes, very hyper local identity, our cell that we're a part of, but then global, this global economy that we're also a part of. So that one village that we're united with, like maybe our village exists in the center of North America, but we're united with villages that are all over the globe. And this is already happening. This Village Builders Alliance, like they represent villages literally all over the planet. So if they come together to form their own economy, they've already created a global economic system with nodes all across the planet, right? And their focus is on regenerative villages, like deep place-based design, like everything that I care about. So that's the culture why I'm joining. But I talked to some people about this and they're like, I hate that idea. I love capitalism. I love like individuality. Like much rather just play video games and like build an artificial world. It's like, okay, cool. Well,
Do you
this
think really anybody
probably
really
not.
loves that?
I don't know. I don't know.
I don't know if anybody really does it. So I designed yeah, I completely, independent, intentional village. I guess it was back in 2007 or something. I had the entire thing planned out, like aquaponic systems and greenhouses, and it would all be built around this, like, and so they'd be like, like yurts basically, but like or houses built around this communal house where people would come together, and where the family you choose would spend time together in community. But the whole village would work to, and I had this whole economic model in my head where, like, people would volunteer their time based on what they were good at and what they could contribute. And so yeah, that was, yeah, I started that. I think it was even earlier, maybe 2005, 2006. That was my first. But yeah, it's definitely on my list, my bucket list. I want to create that. I want to build it.
It seems like maybe we went through a similar journey. Yours a little bit longer than mine, probably. But I kind of glossed over. That's where I started before, when 15 years ago, or whatever, 10, 12. I don't know, a while ago, I got out of the military, and my focus at that time was intentional communities and culture. Such was our thing that we set up. We called it our neighborhood and the Heart Collaborative. It's like a
neighborhood.
Yeah. And it was exactly that, like how we get a village of people to come together, meet all of our needs. Like that was what it was all about. But that kind of came to an end because I think higher desire came in, which is, it was coming in from an energy of like running away. It was like, how do we build an island where we're going to be safe, but the rest of the system's collapsing? So I think ultimately it didn't necessarily work because it wasn't a deep enough shift, which is why I think seeds was necessary. But then come back full circle. It's like, well, now if we are addressing it from a systemic economic perspective, then we could support millions of these villages and forming, because so many people want to do it, but our current financial systems don't finance it. Like, we're sitting here subsidizing oil and gas, so it's cheaper than renewable, not subsidizing setting up regenerative villages.
I know, isn't that insane? And so that's
the direction,
That's the kind of, but that's the whole. I mean, that. I guess that's where the sense of urgency comes in. It just feels like we don't have time to be dicking around like this anymore. And this, this idea that it still blows my mind. I mean, that we're subsidizing fossil fuels at this stage. How can we, anyway? But then that's where my faith comes in with however it is going to come out, however it's going to come into being. It's going to be it's going to be an idea that lands at the moment when it's supposed to, right? And it's going to be articulated in a way that the network can grab hold of and spread like wildfire. And it's going to shake everything. It's going to shake the foundations. And you can see how these things happen, and they start to shake the foundations, and culture just sort of shifts. I think and so that's, and that's my hope. That's my aspiration, is that's how we're going to get there. That's how we're going to get there as fast as we need to, because it all does have to kind of come down before we can really, take these things on. And we are running out of time, it feels to me. I feel a sense of urgency.
One more thing I want to kind of leave this with, because this is super motivating for me, and I'll bring it up real quick. Also, while I'm on this, find that, and I'm going to send you a couple things that I'd love for you to read up on. One's a video, and it goes over the village operating system. Essentially, it's the regenerative village operating system for designing the economic.
I love that.
So I can send that to you. That's something that we're putting together right now in the Alliance. So that's really the deep grounding, place-based approach where seeds can then start financing those projects. So I think that sounds like probably a place we could easily play together and have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So my other question is, where else do you feel like we can?
Well, I mean, I'd just love to learn more about what your, what you're learning through this project of discovery and evolution with the governance system proceeds in the first place. I really love that stuff. I really, really do. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about collective intelligence and how do you harness it, and what are the best ways to and I have so much more to learn. Don't get me wrong. I don't think I'm an expert on this at all. I actually think there are very few experts in this area, because I do think we're just on the cusp of really understanding, how important like connection and experiencing things together is to sort of, feeding what's meaningful back to us. It is where we find it. It is through those connections and moments where we experience things together. That is what meaning is to us, right? And that's how it resonates with us, and that's how it lands with us. And I think that our opportunities to do more and more of this are so emergent right now. And we're going to learn so much. There's going to be some awesome, incredible, creative people who come into this space and teach us how to do things together in small and medium size and whatever groups that just blow our minds, and give us an entirely kind of new purpose, which is to connect and create together. Basically, I think that's gonna be so much, especially when we work out these things where we're not like, we're not in survival mode, where we're not on this like, rats, what do they call it, the rat wheel or the rat race, right? Just trying to get by and pay the mortgage in this bullshit system that we created. Bullshit system we created. When you think about it, you stand back and look at it, you're like, really? We could have come up with anything, and this is what we came up with. It's just who would choose
it was a consciousness that was centuries ago, so let's not be too hard on it.
True. And it's been unconscious for much of the journey. Like we've all been walking dead, really, not thinking about our choices consciously. But so yeah, I think that's super exciting. So the whole governance piece and how we think together and create together and how we evolve. I would love to learn more about how you're trying to express that and what you're learning through that process. I think that would be a fantastic place to play together.
Okay, that one is a massive rabbit hole, so stand by. You might need a lot of time. There's 4 scales that we're doing that right now, and each one is just all consuming. So we're doing at the village scale, which is that whole village, designing governance for that context. There's the region scale, which is, bioregions is kind of how we're looking at it. That's one of the ways we look at it, is at a bioregion scale with the intention of regenerating your bioregion. So that's one of the main reasons. And that requires a different way of making decisions because it's a larger subset of people. You have the organization scale, which is how HIPAA is currently working and operating. So that's real time, how we, structure ourselves. Someone's really alive for us. And if you want to join HIPAA, then you can really take part in that. And then there's the economy scale, which is happening on seeds. And seeds in a fractal right now. Right now, it's doing the whole global governance system, which is a totally different way of making decisions. But really quickly, and we're just getting to that threshold, it's going to happen within the next 3 months. We're launching regions. So then we're fractaling out governance to, place-based. So it's like all kind of happening in each one of those scales. There's different tools for making decisions. There's different ways that are optimal for making decisions. There's a different subset of proposals that can come up that people can reasonably get behind. So you have to have a different way of filtering proposals to actually bring them forward, etc. Like for example, in the organization scale, it's very reasonable to give everyone equal voice. Like let's say, okay, I have 10,000 voice tokens. I can vote on every proposal, and I have my 10,000 weight to do it. Because we don't really need to set a maximum number of proposals because it's already maximum because there's only 150 of us. So every week we maybe have 30 proposals at max. And a lot more of our time is dedicated to that because it's our work. We're expected to be there quite a bit, so we can process that. But when we have something like seeds and economy, which is a global amount of proposals, all of a sudden an infinite number of proposals can come up, and no one's got time for it because no one's getting paid to do that. So have a much deeper way of filtering what proposals actually come forward. So we set limits that only 13 can actually make it through and get passed. Also, we need limits to how fast you want an economy to change. You don't want, 100 economic proposals coming up and radically changing the economic system that throws it off for people who are, used to one particular type of system and ruins it for them, right? So you have to slow it down. While an organization can change much more rapidly. That's just an example. And there's a lot more. But anyway, so each type of scale of organization requires a different governance system. They can be holonic, meaning they can like mirror each other in the tools that we're providing, which is our goal in HIFA, is that all the tools we're providing are holonic, so they can fractal to these different types of scales. But anyway, so that's a whole rabbit hole. I'd be happy to, connect you with as much as you want, but feel free to decline whatever feels too much.
No, it sounds really fascinating. It sounds really fascinating. And I think that the scale question is a tough one, right? Because it's the larger it gets, the harder it is to adapt. And yet the more information and impulse for change is entering the system, right? So you've got this, like, yeah. And I think to a certain extent, again, this is me maybe not being creative, whatever, but you do need some things to remain static.
Totally.
Yeah, or very hard to change, exactly, because there are things you want to preserve about the way the system is built, right? And so there are certain kinds of things and certain, I guess, categories of decisions or types of decisions that have to be a lot harder to make. And the whatever, the litmus test, the threshold over which you need to get to make a decision that this is this fundamental and in this area has to be that much higher, because it is something that is you're working hard to preserve. It's a lot of decisions to make.
Well, and to answer that, like, I love this because we're clearly pulling through the same information. In seeds, we have 3 very basic: low, medium, high. So every protocol is tagged with a low, medium, or high. And if it's low, it's a low unity and a low quorum. So a lot less people and a lot less, alignment required in order to change that. And if it's high, it's obviously the highest amount. So we've set every protocol to say, is this something that's going to be very difficult to change? And high is set at 95% unity. See if that 95% of the people want to change it, right? So these are one of the things that we'll change this if the whole system feels like we need to change it. But we're not going to change it if we don't get to that case. But
right.
It's only 95 is the highest and 80 is the lowest, because 50% unity is the biggest bullshit of anything. Like 50% is fine.
Right.
Yeah, 50%.
Yeah, 50% is civil war.
Yeah, right. So no, we need 80% alignment in order to go anywhere, right? So that's our lowest threshold. Anyway, I want to show you this. It's kind of a detour, but I know it's also getting late for you. So this is it's a wild detour, but I love this because it helps me frame what's going on in the world. So this is the growth velocity of humans. See that?
I know, right?
Okay.
Wait, so I don't know if did you read the thing about China this morning? 1.2 billion people live in that country. They gave birth to 12 million babies last year. That's it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay. So they're way down.
Can you imagine? That's crazy. That's a collapse. And they were talking about how population is down in the States. It's down.
No good for the economy. We're going to have way too much stuff and everyone's needs are going to be met. This is devastating.
Yay. Great. Just pump out more stuff. That's the solution. We'll all be fine.
Then we have total population. So you totally get this. But what I love is this is the total size of a baby, right? And the growth velocity of a baby in a womb. So what I get from this is looking at like the birth of a metahuman, right? And what happens at this point, at the birthing point, which is right here, when it drops to the bottom, right? So we reach this point where it's a literal phase shift. And if we're mirroring, I think
fascinating.
It's not a subtle shift. Like, we are growing lungs in a womb that we don't need. There's no air to breathe, right? We've got legs, there's nowhere to walk, all of this stuff. We've got all of these features that make no sense inside a womb. And when you're thinking inside the womb, it actually looks like a cancer. From one perspective, if we didn't know it was a baby, we'd be like, oh, this cancerous thing is growing.
Yeah, there's something wrong with this, right?
You got to take it out, and that's what humanity kind of looks like. But then it goes through this growth phase where all of a sudden, in a very short period of time, everything changes. And then you realize that all of the systems that you were building inside that womb have a different purpose where we didn't understand before. And that's where I think we're actually going through right now, is that literal birth. We're on the other side of this. It's like, oh, okay, so that's why we built all of these tools and systems that once looked cancerous, but now are incredibly beneficial for this new organism we created, right? So anyway, I like thinking in terms of, a birth period where humanity sure does look like a cancer, but it's not. It's just a baby growing,
That's fascinating. Isn't that interesting? I love thinking in those kinds of metaphors. I often use the metaphor of, just a human life when I'm talking about the evolution of countries. And my favorite example is the United States. And right now, the United States is like to the rest of the world is like an impetuous teenager with a gun, and they're not sure what to do with it. Like he's like greedy and bold and brash and does really stupid shit and changes his mind a lot, and has violent tendencies. That's how the whole world looks at the United States.
Not even
Like, what do we
violent
do with that?
tendencies. He's been known to murder a couple of the kids in the playground and open.
Yeah, exactly. But he thinks he's a good guy. That's the thing. He thinks he's a good guy. Truly believes that.
That was
hard.
Okay.
Well, listen, it was always so wonderful to talk to you. I'm really glad we connected. Obviously, that there's so much going on in your world that I believe in. It's really awesome. So, yes, please involve me in the alliance. I'm open to finding out how to join Haifa and whatever else. Nice name, by the way. But yeah, I definitely want to learn. What's that?
Do you know what Haifa is?
I know it's a place.
Haifa is the hair. Do you know the mycelial net, the fungi that connects the forest? Haifa is one of the hairs. So the hairs are called the Haifa, plural. But Haifa is a hair. So Haifa is like the one thing that connects everything and helps the ecosystem. So
that's interesting.
Kind of what Haifa is building tools to help the ecosystem connect. So we want to be that connective tissue. But we don't own it.
It's the neural network of the forest.
Right.
Oh, that's awesome. That's very, very cool. I did not know that.
One last thing. I know I'm overwhelming you. I'll send an email following up. But something else is forming right now. Is some really high impact, incredible people are coming together to do an exchange traded fund around regenerative food and seeds.
Nice.
Basically an index fund for funding. And we can use the Haifa tools and create the world's largest, whatever, it doesn't have to be world's largest, but a global co-op of farmers coming together where we invest into their farm, buy 10% of it or whatever. That gives them liquidity, then transition to regenerative agriculture. And then use the tools that provide them for marketplaces, direct to consumer selling, using seeds to reduce their costs and overhead. Because what's ridiculous is you don't look at it, but a payment processor taking 3%, the margins on producing food are incredibly low. That 3% sometimes represents 30 or 40 or even 60% of profit margins. It's massive, massive cut. So being able to give them that value and help them transition is what's coming together here. So
that's fantastic. And we do have to, I think it all comes back to food. If we had, and I love the fact that regenerative agriculture has actually entered the vernacular now with such force, because I don't know, even a few years ago, you didn't hear people talking about it, not that much. They were talking about like, okay, we need organic farming, or we need to, move away from industrial farming. But regenerative agriculture is so like, everybody's talking about it now, which is just amazing. It's such a, and it seems to have come on quite quickly. Like I'd say in the last 2 years, I'm suddenly hearing about it all the time. People are talking about it. So I think it's really entering the public consciousness as a completely different way to approach food. And again, going back to food, if we treat food differently, we'll treat the planet differently, and we'll have, we could solve all things if we could just start there.
Then my 100% yes. And my final thought here is, I believe that changing food differently comes from experiencing it. Like, we don't give up anything. I feel like the narrative around food and agriculture is kind of like this give up concept. It's like, oh, change your diet, give up meat, or give up those tasty, delicious things and eat the dirty, nasty vegan food, or however it's framed. It's terrible, right? But it's like regenerative, fresh from the food, like garden food, is so delicious and tasty.
So much better.
It's not even a question. Like, you make a meal out of that, you just like orgasming in your mouth. It's not, you don't give up anything. Like,
so much better.
So much more. And if we can make that experience also cheaper, then it's a complete game changer.
Yeah.
Those systems can't even like compare. And why should they?
I
don't think we need to frame this in a sense of like, let's give up, which unfortunately keeps happening. It's framing in a perspective of let's get so much freaking more out of our relationship with life,
let's actually get nutrients out of our food. I know it's a crazy, crazy idea, but I mean, I think we could get there, something other than the McDonald's drive-through. Oh my God. Anyway, terrible.
I'll let you get some sleep. It was beautiful meeting you. I'm so happy we connected. I'll send you
Yeah,
a
me too.
follow up with, and we'll take it from there.
I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time, Ricky.
You too. Thanks, Tom.
All right. Talk to you soon.